Day 756. Saturday, December 13th. John 3:22-36. John 3:22-36. NKJV. After these things, Jesus and his disciples came into the land of Judea, and there he remained with them and baptized. Now John also was baptizing in Aenon near Salim, because there was much water there, and they came and were baptized. For John had not yet been thrown into prison. Then there arose a dispute between some of John's disciples and the Jews about purification. And they came to John and said to him, Rabbi, you beyond the Jordan, to whom you have testified, behold, he is baptizing, and all are coming to him. John answered and said, A man can receive nothing unless it has been given to him from heaven. You yourselves bear me witness that I said, I am not the Christ, but I have been sent before him. He who has the bride is the bridegroom, but the friend of the bridegroom who stands and hears him rejoices greatly because of the bridegroom's voice. Therefore this joy of mine is fulfilled. He must increase, but I must decrease. He who comes from above is above all. He who is of the earth is earthly and speaks of the earth. He who comes from heaven is above all. And what he has seen and heard, that he testifies, and no one receives his testimony. He who has received his testimony has certified that God is true. For he whom God has sent speaks the words of God. For God does not give the Spirit by measure. The Father loves the Son, and has given all things into his hand. He who believes in the Son has everlasting life, and he who does not believe the Son shall not see life, but the wrath of God abides on him. Daily Deep Dive. Verse 22. This verse seems to be in contradiction with John 4:2, where it says though Jesus himself did not baptize, but his disciples. This verse is describing activity of a group. The Greek remained, delta iota alpha tar hoi beta omega, shows that Christ was present and spent time or past time with them. It was common in both Hebrew and Greek to show actions that others did on behalf or under a leader attributed to the leader. For example, in Joshua 5:3, Joshua did not do all the circumcisions himself, and in 1 Kings 6:14, Solomon did not build the temple himself. We will see this clearly again in John 4:1-2 when we get there. So the leader's name is used to describe the actions of his followers. It's important to understand that they only could do these baptisms because they were given the authority by Jesus to do so. Nowhere in the Bible can someone take authority to themselves to perform baptisms. It is always passed down from authority to authority, retaining the ultimate authority of Jesus Christ. We might take this time to ask, why didn't Jesus baptize anyone? Could you imagine how much division might later come from someone who said, I was baptized by Jesus himself? Who were you baptized by? Human nature may easily use this to create problems. Verse 23. Perhaps you've already noticed, but John likes to make clarifying statements in his writings to avoid possible confusions. For example, John 2:21, 7:39, 12:33. John seems to go out of his way here, which I'm thankful for, to let us know there was much, or a large abundance of water in this area. This is connected to him performing baptisms there. And as we've already discussed, this requires immersion-submersion. This, again, is another reason why the Bible is clear that baptism does not involve sprinkling a little bit of water. We might wonder, why is John still baptizing here when Jesus' public ministry has begun? Part of John's role was to prepare the people for Jesus and to turn them toward repentance. This was still active. Clearly God had not removed or instructed John that his mission was over yet. We will see at the end of this chapter, verse 30, that John was aware of his own role, and was never in competition with Jesus. He remained humble and focused on his supportive role. Verse 24. Here we have another interjected clarification from John. John was baptizing and likely would have continued, but God allowed John's work to come to an end when he was thrown into prison. Verse 25. The Greek word for purifications used here was kappa alpha thet alpha hoiota sigma mu makronu, katharismu. It was a broad term that meant ritual washing, ceremonial cleansing, or purification rites. By the 1st century, the Jews had many purification rites. They had mikveh fully body immersions to purify from bodily discharges and menstruation. They also used these baths before entering the temple, or when a non-Jew converted to Judaism. Archaeology shows hundreds of these baths in Jerusalem and throughout Judea and Galilee. They also had various hand-washing rituals, especially the Pharisees, compare Mark 7:2-5. They would wash before meals, after the marketplace, as well as cups, pitchers, and vessels. These are not found in the Old Testament, but were traditions. Additionally, they had other purifications tied to being defiled by a corpse, after childbirth and for offerings, sacrifices. We aren't given details here, but we can imagine the conflict that is coming as large crowds are coming to both John and Jesus to be baptized. Was it motivated by those wanting to hold on to power and tradition? Was it motivated by confusion? Verses 26-32. Here John's disciples see that Jesus through his disciples is now baptizing, and large groups are coming to Jesus. There appears to be a bit of jealousy and concern here, as previously this was their rabbi's thing, baptizing. John then demonstrates a tremendous attitude of humility and faith. He trusts God with timing, details, etc. John reminds his disciples that all along he has told them he wasn't the Christ, but that instead he was going before him. In verse 29, we understand that the best man or the maid of honor, while in valued and exalted positions, are not the focus. The focus and honor are on the bride and groom. The best man or maid of honor isn't in competition or focusing on themselves, they are joyful. In verse 30, John doesn't say his job is over, coming to a stop, but that as Jesus grows in fame and following, John's role will get smaller and smaller. In verse 31, John clearly understands that he's on a completely different level from Christ. Again, there is not a hint of competition or pride here. Verse 33, the NKJV says has certified, and the KJV says hath set to his seal. In the ancient world, when you agreed with a document, contract, or statement, you sealed it with your signet ring. This meant you certify it as true, accept it personally, stand behind it, and make it binding to yourself. Verse 34, the NKJV says for God does not give the Spirit by measure. In the Greek the word translated measure, muetarhumikronupsilon, was a measuring device, a fixed quantity, with limit and boundary, or a controlled and restricted amount. You might think of this as a ration or quota. The context of this and the preceding verses is about the one God sent who comes from above. Here in speaking of Jesus, God did not set a limit, or give him only a ration of the Spirit. John is clearly showing that Jesus is fundamentally different than anyone else on earth. God has never given anyone else his Spirit in this manner. Verse 36. As we bring our study week to an end, we have spent the entire week in several chapters of John. And this verse is a great verse to end on, because it again summarizes much of what John has been recording and teaching us. Jesus came down from heaven, and was not just another human being. He came down from heaven as the only special and unique Son of God, and you and I believe that. But our believing in our mind is not enough. We must walk in the light. We must become like him in every possible way we can through the help of his Spirit in our lives. What a special calling.